Live. So happy Thursday and welcome to our very first No Code Ops community show of 2023. Happy New Year, everyone. And we're today here with Chris Coleman as our first guest speaker. We're very happy to have you here today, Chris. And we also have Jens, our head of marketing at No Code Ops, who will be my glamorous assistant and helping me out with the direction of the event and also supporting with the Q&A at the end and also trying to remind me of all the events that we have coming up. Forum feature into our Discord, into our No Code Ops community, and one of the things that we are APIs. So we started joking around it. We started getting into APIs and kind of researching about them. There was a lot of interest out there. We also started a thread called Planet of APIs, and we decided to kind of dedicate a whole series of events on this particular topic. And just because of so much interest around APIs, we decided to extend all events going on to the week of February. Jens, can you remind us what kind of events we're going to have?
Yeah, hey guys, really nice. So many people showing up. So we have Chris with us today, and he will do a very thorough introduction to APIs for no coders today, and he will come back next week and show us more hands-on how you can build your own backend by setting up your database, build your own API. Then we'll also show you how you can integrate that backend with tools, platforms like Bubble, Webflow, and Adalo. So make sure to book next week, same time. The week after, we will have a new presenter and we will dive into how to read and understand API documentation. The week after that, we will talk about when you should use APIs already existing and when you should build your own. And if you signed up for this event, you will get all the information you need by email. One thing left, we also have a very interesting API boot camp in March. And after Chris's presentation, we will talk more about that.
Fantastic. You're giving out all the good stuff. That's amazing. Well, yeah, basically that's our little surprise, our little present for you in the new year. We gathered so much interest around APIs that we thought of partnering up with 9x and yeah, work together on this bootcamp. And as my glamorous assistant Jens is saying, we will talk more about that before the Q&A. But now going back to Chris. Chris, I know that you're a part of the customer success at Xano, but you're also a no-code enthusiast, and I've known you for maybe a year now, and you know you're everywhere in the no-code space. Can you tell us a bit more about, like, obviously who you are, your role, but also like your passion for no-code before diving into the world of APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name's Chris. Thank you so much, Claudia, for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and shout out to everyone that is watching. I hope you you get something good out of these presentations. My own kind of journey into the world of no code, I guess, just to put it as quickly as possible. I spent a little over 3 years freelancing. And that was essentially mainly just in Webflow. And what I really latched onto a lot more than the freelancing itself was the community. Assisting other people with what they were building, and making sure things work right and helping them correct problems and things like that. I really latched onto kind of that support side of the no code community, which is so important, right? Because as much as we have these communities, there are times where we're kind of doing it ourselves, and sometimes we need a little help. So having people that we can reach out to, I think, is super important. And so kind of taking that piece and knowing that I was more comfortable kind of on the support side as opposed to the building by myself side. That was when the stars aligned and I discovered Xano, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And Xano is a platform that allows you to build your own backend and your own APIs with no code. And it was just like this magic moment where I opened up the platform and I learned about APIs and what they can do and how they can connect different services together, and how they can enable efficiency and modernization and all these innovations that you would never really even consider until you recognize the power of an API. And it was just like this light bulb moment, and I was like, whoa, like after spending, I don't know, 15 years of my life constantly trying to learn to code and it not working and trying to make these things happen and it not really clicking, being able to do that with no code was just awesome. So I hope that I can kind of give you the tools to unlock that same magic moment and kind of realize the potential with third-party APIs, as well as building your own through these next two presentations. Sorry, that was a lot. Hopefully that was kind of along the lines
And that's
of what we
fantastic.
were
No,
going
it's
for.
it's absolutely fine, and it's really interesting to see kind of how like you go into the learning process. From being okay, maybe the building by myself is not such a fun activity to do. So then you went and into a different kind of field, but then you taught yourself more about APIs, and I can really relate to that because being APIs them don't necessarily know what they are, but they're like, oh yeah, there's an API for that, and you don't know what that is, right? It's one of the most used acronyms in the no-code world. So what is an API? Chris, can you tell us and tell everyone else here? And do you want me to pop your screen share on
Sure.
the stream?
Let's
Amazing.
do it. All right. So welcome to the introduction to APIs for no coders. Thank you again for being here. We'll go ahead and take a look at just kind of a quick look at what I'm going to discuss today. First, we will talk about, of course, what is an API. I'm going to go over a few kind of real world examples just to help make APIs maybe a little bit more understandable. And then I'm going to talk for a second about APIs that you're probably already using. There's a very good chance that you are already utilizing APIs and you may not even know it. I'm going to talk a little bit about making API requests and what an API request and response actually contains. I'm going to talk about decreasing your development time with the power of APIs. And then finally, after all of that, I'll show you a super quick example of using a third-party API, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. So with that being said, again, my name's Chris. I'm part of the customer success team at Xano, specifically the content lead. So if you have by chance used Xano already and you've opened support chat, I've probably been the person that you've been speaking to. And I'm looking forward to creating even more content, in the near future as we grow our customer success team. You can find me on Twitter at Coleman Crispy, or you can find me in the No Code Ops Discord server. So if you have any questions about working with APIs, integrating with your front ends, or potentially harnessing the power of building your own, please feel free to hit me up at any time. So what is an API? An API is an application programming interface. It's essentially used to enable systems to talk to each other in a standardized format. So you can share data and functionality between separate services. So as an example, let's say you play a song on Spotify. You can see here I'm listening to some Carly Rae Jepsen. And maybe you have a Last.fm profile. So every time you listen to music, it populates on your Last.fm page. So what's happening behind the scenes there? All you see is you hit play on Spotify and you see your Last.fm profile update. But what's happening is when you play that song, Last.fm is actually making an API request to Spotify. And they're saying, hey, Spotify, what's Chris listening to right now? And Spotify is taking all of their Spotify data, it's translating it into a standardized format and then sending that formatted data to Last.fm so Last.fm can take that standard set of data and then turn it into Last.fm data and update your profile and do whatever it is that they want to do with that. So that's just a brief example of kind of the flow of a typical API request. You can think of it as like a secret tunnel between two systems, so they can talk to each other. APIs can open up like an entire world of possibilities for building and adding new innovations and features to your projects. So think of something that you're building now. You can take an API and integrate things like weather or social media or a maps integration, or maybe you want to send emails to your users when they perform certain actions. Those would all be performed via APIs. And then, of course, APIs for you can enable efficiency and increased productivity. So maybe you have a task every week where you're pouring through a set of data and you're making modifications by hand. You could probably build yourself an API to do that for you, or to just transform the data automatically. So that is less of you with the keyboard and mouse working with that data, and more, enabling you to kind of take that time and spend it on other tasks that would require your intervention. So there's APIs are essentially limitless in what you can do with them. A great example that we like to give is the example of a restaurant. So if you are, if you're a customer at a restaurant, you walk in and you talk to a waiter. You place your order with the waiter. The waiter is the API. The waiter can take your order and it can translate it into a format that the kitchen then understands. The kitchen, as maybe your server or your database or other kind of logic there, um, will prepare your order, and it will hand it back to the waiter, who can then hand it back to you. So your waiter, as that API, is kind of that translation layer between your order, making sure the kitchen can understand it, and then taking what the kitchen has prepared for you and giving it back to you. So you have your request, which is the order, and then your response, which is your completed meal. Another example is a buy now button. So you go to Amazon, you click buy now, and you don't have to do anything else. You are then charged for this item, and it is shipped to you, and you don't really have to do anything else. But there are probably about 1,000 different things happening behind the scenes when you click that buy now button, and it is all powered by APIs. So when you click buy now, an API call is made to Amazon servers, and that Amazon server then takes that request, and they probably call like a purchasing API. So maybe this purchasing API then sends an API request to the warehouse that says, hey, is this item actually in stock? And then at the same time, they're sending a request to the payment provider, and they're saying, hey, is this payment method valid? And does this person, will it work for this transaction? Is there enough money on this card for this transaction to go through? And once those APIs respond positively, then maybe the warehouse is spoken to again to make that item, to allocate that item for your order. And the warehouse then contacts the shipping provider again via an API to get a tracking number, so you can actually track the progress of that shipment. So something that just seems incredibly simple, where you click buy and you get your item. There's a ton of things happening on the back end, and that is all powered by APIs that are designed so these services can talk to each other. So it's just really cool to think about kind of all of the different things that might be happening and what they're powered by, and it is all via APIs.
Chris, we have a question coming up, and can I just say that you had me with the food analogy? I love that.
Awesome.
I love how inclusive you are of everyone, because of course there's always some kind of hate towards mom. People always say, how would you explain this to your mom? Like, why do you assume that your mom can't understand things? I don't know. But to me, like, you explaining it that simple way, like in the food analogy, you completely had me there. So thank you so much for making it relatable and applicable to everyone.
For sure.
We have a question, which is, what's the advantage of using API?
So the advantage of using APIs instead of tools like Zapier, and I do talk a little bit more about this later on, but just to give like a super brief kind of overview, when you use Zapier, you're using APIs. So what it's almost more about is Zapier has kind of assisted you in that translation layer. So taking data from one service and sending it to another. And Zapier has also given us, a very simple interface to make that connection. But really, at the end of the day, if you're using Zapier, you're using APIs. There's not a difference there. Zapier has an integration with I don't know, let's say Google Sheets as an example. There's not really anything super magic happening behind the scenes there. They're calling a Google API. If you are sending an email with Zapier, again, you're just calling an API of a mail service. So it's really just kind of a veil in front of APIs is essentially what tools like Zapier and Make offer you, and it's super valuable to have that because it makes things really simple. But just to hopefully that kind of puts things in perspective in terms of what's actually happening there.
Perfect.
All right. So again, kind of leading into the next topic, are you using APIs already? The answer is probably yes. So again, talking about Zapier and Make, these are powerful tools that can enable some of this functionality in a super easy to understand interface. But at the end of the day, these are just API calls. So as an example, you could have a Zap that sends you an email whenever a new customer signs up to your mailing list. So when that user fills out the form, maybe you're using a form service like Paperform. Paperform and what Zapier does is Zapier handles the API calls between Paperform and your email providers. Maybe you're using like SendGrid or MailChimp or something like that. Zapier is just making those API calls for you. There's really nothing more kind of happening there. They, of course, again, give you a super easy way to do that, but that's just kind of an example of what's going on there. And webhooks. I'm sure that as you have built out your applications and your websites, you have utilized webhooks at some point. Maybe again via Zapier or Make, or maybe you have a Webflow site and you are you're utilizing a webhook to process Webflow form submissions. So a webhook is something that allows you to send information to another app when a specific event or action occurs. So the example is essentially, well, we have two applications, application A and application B. Application B needs to know when something happens in application A. So instead of application B just constantly pinging application A, it's like you're calling your friend every 5 minutes and saying, hey, is my package here yet? Hey, did my package arrive yet? Like, you're not going to do that, right? You're just going to want to be notified when it does. So that is when webhooks come into play. A webhook can send out that notification when something happens, so that constant ping doesn't have to happen. So it just kind of promotes efficiency and ease of use there.
I'm just gonna say hi to Philip, our CEO.
Well, hello. All right.
Who's here watching, and he's
awesome. So let's talk about making an API request. What does that actually entail? So there are a few key components to an API request. The API request needs an endpoint URL. This is the URL that you're actually sending that request to. And then you have a method that goes along with that. When you make an API request, you need to specify a method. The method will typically dictate the type of actions being performed. So some of the most common would be get. So get is a method that typically means you are just retrieving data. Another method is post, which typically means you are creating new data. You also have methods like put and patch, which are typically for updating existing data, and then delete, which is, of course, for deleting data. So every API request is going to have a method. Next, you have your headers in the request. Headers are essentially any additional information that's necessary about the request being made. So this will typically contain, information about the format of the data, or maybe authorization. So if you have like a username and password that you need to provide to actually utilize this API, or maybe an API key, those are going to be contained inside of the headers. And then we have query parameters. So query parameters are information, pieces of information passed in the URL to specify certain options with the API. So this could be maybe the API is returning 10,000 pieces of information, and you only need the first page. So you could specify a page as a query parameter. Or maybe you need to filter or sort a certain way. Those are typically handled via query parameters. They don't have to be. It really just depends on what the API is specifically asking for. And then finally, you have the request body. So a request body would be, as an example, a form submission. So if you have a form, and when that form is submitted and that API request is made to send that form data wherever it needs to go, the body of this request will contain the form data. So again, just a little bit more of a visual example here. You can see that we have our request URL. I'm actually not sure if they can. Okay, it looks like you can't see my mouse. So we have our request URL right here, and this request. Awesome, thank you. This request URL then has a query parameter. So the query parameters for this specific API, which is the Star Wars API, has the people parameter and then a one parameter. Our method is get, because we are just calling this API to get some data. And then finally, we have our request headers that define the request that we're making. Once we've made a request to the API, that API then does whatever it's supposed to do, and it will typically return a response. So what does a response contain? A response contains typically a status. So this is usually a code and like a text description that essentially just lets you know if this was a successful request. So you'll typically get like a 200 success if the call was successful, potentially a 404 if the API was just not found. Maybe there's an error in the URL. Maybe I believe a 403 is unauthorized. So if this API requires authentication and you are not authenticated to call that API, that could be a status that you would be returned. And then we have our headers, which is just additional information about the response. Again, typically with like things like the format of the data that's being sent back. And then finally, you have your response body, which is the actual data that we're requesting. And just to show you another example here. This is an API response from that API call that we just took a look at earlier. So you can see we have in our headers for the response, we have our status code and then some additional information about the API that we've called. And then we have our result. So this is our response body that has the data that we called. So we've gone over what an API is. We've gone over some real world examples, and we've gone over typically what an API request actually looks like. So let's talk about actually decreasing your development time with an API. And this is obviously the most exciting part, because we all want to make sure that we are working as efficiently as we possibly can. So let's talk about it. How can you actually integrate APIs into your application? So let's say you have an idea for a third-party service that you would like to integrate with. You want to use their APIs. The first thing we need to think about is, does your front end actually support making API requests, and what can it do with those responses? Obviously, there's a vast number of no-code front ends available, and they are all amazing in their own right, but they all kind of have different capabilities, in terms of what they can actually do with an API request. And then you want to think about, what does that implementation look like? Is it a fully no or low code implementation, or do you actually have to write a custom code to utilize this API? And again, that really just kind of depends on the front end that you're integrating with. Obviously, there are countless examples. You know, we all have our own again, we all have our own things that we're building, and we all have different capabilities that we want to be able to add to our applications. I would love to hear you know, in the chat about what everybody is building, and maybe some consider built to just a small set of data here, perhaps in Airtable or Google Sheets, or maybe my no-code front end actually has a database available, and I'm just populating data in there by hand. I'm going into that database and I'm either copying and pasting, or I'm typing in every movie name and description and director and year of release and everything about that, right? Obviously, there's a problem here. The problem is we cannot expect to be tasked with manually curating all of this data. It would basically be impossible. The solution to that would be to then utilize an API that can actually offer this data to our users, so we don't have to worry about populating this data ourselves. So I want to show you a quick example here. I'm just going to drag this window over. So I have a very please forgive the crude example application. So I have a Bubble application here that I have built that interacts with an API that gives me information about movies. So if you have worked in Bubble before, you have probably seen the data tab and worked inside here in this, because this is where you will populate the data that accompanies your Bubble application, right? So I have a data type here of movies, which just contains a description, a title, and things like that. And if I want to actually add to this database, guess what I'm doing? I'm clicking that button and I am filling out everything by hand. So my description, my title, the movie year, just again, as an example. Obviously, this is not feasible. So what we can actually do is we can utilize a plugin in Bubble, which is the API connector plugin, which allows me to connect to the movie DB. They have an API that I can use to call them for movie information. And thankfully, Bubble actually makes this pretty straightforward to set up. So we've given Bubble our API URL, which also includes a few hard-coded query parameters like this API key, the language. We have our query itself. The movie DB wants all of this as part of the URL, so those are all query parameters. And that's all we really needed to do here. And then in Bubble itself, we have our search box and a search button, and then our repeating group. And you can see if I open up the settings for the repeating group, we have the type of content is the result from our search movies API, and the data source is again just coming from the results of that API. So we can preview this here. We'll give this just a second to open up, or maybe a little bit more than a second. There we go.
Connections these days. There you go.
So if we type in, let's just type in The Exorcist as our movie here, and you can kind of see these results just populating as we type, and this is all coming from that API. So what I have done, and obviously I didn't build this live, but really this took me a matter of maybe 5 or 10 minutes to put together. And we, of course, know that 5 or 10 minutes to put together this movie search is a lot better than spending, again, forgive the example, but maybe 5 or 10 years to populate a movie database by hand. Obviously, it's a little bit silly, but I hope this kind of demonstrates just a small amount of the possibility of utilizing those APIs. And so with that, I think that is that's about the end of my presentation. So Claudia, I will kick it back to you. Thank you so much for listening to me
That's
ramble everybody for
fantastic.
so long, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm so happy, first off, that you're here. I feel like I can just sit here and keep on listening to you, because you have such a explaining things, and it was a real pleasure just to go through everything, because you're not just, people could either be too technical or too vague, and the way that you just went through each and every step in such a simple and really well explained way really made it easy even for me, who I've used APIs, but maybe the ones that are already made out there, the simple ones that you can just easily connect, or as people are suggesting here, like from Zapier or other tools, but I never actually looked into their inner structure, and you made it easy for me to understand. So thank you so much, Chris. I'm so
Sure.
happy that we have you here today and coming back next week to show us how to build our own API. So that's fantastic. So yes, we have some Q&A. So I can see Jens popping back up. Jens.
Before we get into the Q&A, and as it says on the screen, feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll try to go through as many as possible. But before we do that, I'd like to present the API bootcamp that we are going to do in the beginning of March. So we teamed up with 9X, a no-code automation agency that specializes in internal process automation. We will be doing a 3-week workshop-style bootcamp on APIs for no-coders. So you'll be able to learn together with others on how to read API documentation, make successful API calls, work with webhooks, create powerful API-based workflows. Every week there will be a live workshop. You will have 24/7 access to our Discord server with all the other participants, where you can ask questions, where you can collaborate, and you can get feedback. And this bootcamp will start on the 6th of March. And this today is actually our launch of this bootcamp. So if you want to snatch one of the spots, you can go to this URL and you can read more about it. We will send it out to everyone via email afterwards, so you can still stick around here and listen to the Q&A. But this is an amazing opportunity to learn basically everything you need to know about APIs and no-code from 3 professional automation experts. So take a look at this. We will send the link out afterwards.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Jens. And obviously the opportunity, to then hang out with the community. And did you use any APIs to create this?
So let's jump into some questions, should we?
Oh, I think my connection is not going really well.
You're breaking up sometimes, but
oh, I asked you if you were using any APIs to build the bootcamp.
Let's not talk about that. Let's kick off with some questions. So we had
secrets.
We had tons of questions before this event, and I've looked through all of them. Chris already answered most of it. We will answer many of them in the upcoming events. So I would try to pick those that haven't been answered and are connected to what we're talking about today. So
Awesome.
Let's start off with this one. I would love to get a picture of APIs being used with no-code tools at different levels of complexity. This is where a beginner would start, and this is where you can take it from there.
Wow, that's a great question. I guess it kind of this kind of almost speaks to what your own flow is as a developer. I guess some of us like to jump in head first and maybe not necessarily have like an order to the order that we're building our functionality of our application. So we may jump into something super complex right away, or we may start with something easy. I guess the way that I would want to approach this question then would be to maybe think about like an existing project, and maybe what would be like a good first step to kind of expanding it with API functionality. So maybe like a website for like a fitness coach, just as an example. And of course, this includes information about them, a description of the services that they offer, and then maybe it just has their email address at the bottom. And or maybe like a link to a Facebook page or an Instagram or something where you can send them a message, and that's how those services are initiated. But maybe this person wants to kind of make that process a little bit more smooth. So an awesome kind of jumping off point that would be pretty low complexity would be just a form. You set up a form on your website and you utilize a service that that handles those forms. Like again, like paper form or jot form or something like that. Those would be great starting off points. And in terms of kind of growing in levels of complexity, taking that same example of the form, maybe we want to send our customers down a different path based on the information that they provide in that form. So you don't have this direct line of form to email. Now you have form to maybe some light data processing. So maybe this user says that they want to work on bulking up, and you have other users that want to work on slimming down, and you have different kind of services to offer them. That would be kind of the next level of complexity in that. And then, kind of even going up from there, would probably, I would say, be integrating, like payment processing and, maybe some machine learning to kind of guide people directly to the services that they need and removing that human interaction completely. So hopefully that's kind of a good example of approaching APIs in terms of a project and kind of what those different complexity levels might look like.
Jens, can I take one of those questions? Brian, I think I saw a Saf. So I saw one question that maybe we could ask, if you don't mind me, because I want to know myself. What is a REST API?
So there are different kinds of APIs, and I have definitely solidified myself in working with REST APIs. So in terms of the differences there, I think as you kind of go through these presentations, you'll be able to get a better idea of all of the different types. REST stands for, and I may have to look this up because I don't remember off the top of my head. Representational state transfer. Don't ask me what that means. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you, but essentially when you're talking about different types of APIs, so like you have REST APIs and you also have GraphQL APIs, which you may have heard of. GraphQL was basically a query language developed by Facebook originally to allow for more complex queries while still maintaining efficiency. And what it boils down to is the architecture of those requests. So a REST API will require a certain structure of data in the request, and a GraphQL API would require an entirely different structure in terms of how those requests work. If you want a really good example to compare the two, I would actually look at Monday.com's API. They use a GraphQL API, and they actually have a really handy developer playground available right in the app, so you can go and you can kind of play with the queries and see what those structural differences look like. So hopefully that kind of gives you just an idea of there are different types of APIs out there. Typically, you will be working with a REST API, which works with JSON bodies and responses.
I hope that cleared it up.
For sure. I'm sure the more we get of Chris, the more I learn.
I hope so.
Let's see if I can. Sorry. I'm trying to show the next question without removing the first one. So I'm going to do that one. And there you go. So can I implement no code plus APIs with complex websites such as stock market analysis? But maybe a more overall question is what kind of websites can you use the API, and how do you know if you can?
I think that really kind of boils down to the tools that you're using. First of all, if you are, of course, going full a full code approach, and you are just building the website completely, coding it completely by hand, then yeah, you can absolutely utilize an API, and as long as that API is available. In terms of building with no code, again, it does depend on the platform that you're utilizing. Does that platform give you the type of power that you need to work with these APIs and these responses? And something like a stock market analysis platform is probably going to need a lot of data transformation. With something like that, I would say come back next week so I can show you Xano, because something like that would absolutely save your life in building a platform like that. And I would also want to touch for a second, and only for a second, because I think the API documentation, the presentation that you had both mentioned, is going to be super valuable here in determining this. But in terms of whether you actually can use an API, it's really just about finding services that have this information available and seeing if they have an API. And if they do, then you would be looking through their documentation and seeing what's possible.
Here is another one. You've been touching up a lot on this, but it's always good to go back and clarify. So, what are the limits when you're using APIs in no-code tools like we talked about Zapier, Bubble, Webflow, and when you go like you said, full code?
Yeah, so it's an awesome question, and it's definitely one that I see, almost daily. Working in on this support side at Xano, and kind of seeing these questions come in about, well, how can I do this in my front end, or my front end doesn't do this? Do you have a recommendation for a front end that is maybe a little bit less limiting in what I'm trying to do? And I will say, because I basically fully exist in the backend space now, I am not a source of truth for like a front end recommendation. That belongs to the community, whether it's the no code ops community here, or other communities that you're a part of. I definitely recommend just posing the question of, this is what I want to build. Will this front end work for me? Now, in terms of like a couple of specific examples, what tends to be limiting is when you're building a front end in a no code front end tool, they all have very specific ways of how they allow you to present that data. As an example, there are some no code front ends that if you have an API response, and that API response has like nested objects and nested data. So like maybe in your response, you have like cars, and then under cars, you have Ford and Chevrolet and Toyota. And then under Ford and Chevrolet and Toyota, then you have, different kinds of cars that are made by those manufacturers. There are no code front ends that don't like nested responses. So then you say, okay, well, I either have to find a new API or find a new front end. So it's unfortunately just kind of the way it works. So I definitely recommend, consulting the front end's documentation in terms of what they can do with APIs, and kind of making that decision from there based on the consideration of the APIs that you're going to be working with. Hopefully that at least kind of gives you a starting path there.
I'm sure we're going to see a little bit about that, or a lot about that next week.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind giving us the short version of what we're going to talk about next week?
Absolutely. So next week we are going to dive fully into Xano. Xano is a platform that allows you to build your backend with no code. So what is a backend? A backend is your database. So all of the data that your application relies on, like user data, things like that. We give you a database. We give you a scalable server to power your backend, and we also provide you with a no-code API builder, which allows you to build your own custom APIs from scratch with a super simple drag and drop interface. So next week we are going to look at building an example backend. I'm going to show you a backend that I've built for it's like a loyalty card app. So like coupons at different restaurants, basically. I'm going to show you how the backend works. I'm going to show you how to put that together in Xano. And then I'm also going to show you how you can connect that to your favorite no-code front ends and show you what the end result looks like. And if you have a favorite no-code front end that maybe I can try to squeeze in before next week, let me know in the Discord, and I'll try to make it happen. I'm currently going to show you Bubble, Webflow, and Adalo. But if you have another one you'd like to see, I can see what I can do there.
That's fantastic. I just feel like it's Christmas all over again. And so thank you so much, Chris, for being here again. You've been such a fantastic speaker, and you have so much knowledge on the matter, and I'm looking forward to learning some more from you. Jens, did you want to share the link for our book interested into getting a deeper, broader knowledge and learning on APIs? Feel free to just let us know if you're interested as well. If you want to DM me, you can find me on Discord or anywhere on social media. And if you want to attend these fantastic events here that we have at No Code Ops, remember to subscribe to our newsletter so that we can keep sending you these invitations as well, and so you don't miss out on these fantastic, amazing speakers that we have every week. So, and do we have any last minute questions?
I think we are good. We've gone through almost everything we had, and I'm sure we will answer many more questions during the next few weeks.
Fantastic. Well, then again, I wish you all a fantastic rest of your week, and thank you all for coming in the chat. It was really nice to see you.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Chris.
Bye. Thank you.